Thank you, Speaker. I also rise to make a contribution to this discussion on the address by the Lieutenant Governor in relation to the address in reply debate, and want to acknowledge, I guess first and foremost, the fact that in his speech the Lieutenant Governor acknowledged the contribution and the feelings that new members in this chamber would be having, and I would say this is my first opportunity to acknowledge here the new members that are here and welcome them to this crazy place that is the New South Wales Legislative Assembly, but particularly acknowledge my Greens colleague Kobe Shetty, who is here as the member for Balmain, recognising the fact that there is a very large gap left by the former member for Balmain, but feeling very confident, having campaigned with Kobe over the last year or more in her role and then as the candidate for Balmain, that she is going to be filling those shoes with no effort whatsoever, because she will be working hard for her community and is absolutely committed to being here. It's really important that we recognise, Speaker, the fact that we are in what I like to describe as a new world order here in New South Wales. We have seen a change of government after 12 years where some of the most vulnerable and desperate people in our community have been left behind, where big business, where corporate profits, where corporate interests, where backroom deals and discussions with mates in corporate boxes at stadiums ruled the way that our democracy functioned. And I would want to take this opportunity as well to congratulate the Minns Labor government on their election and say that it is a very welcome thing to see the Labor members on the government side of the benches, and acknowledge the Minister for Women who is here in the chamber with us today, and say that I'm very, very pleased to see her in that role as well. One of the things that we know as well in this new parliament is that there is a minority government, and acknowledging the contribution that the Premier made on the first day of formal business here in this current sitting, is that it means that in many ways there will be a much more, I think, robust and healthy and hopefully at times respectful form of debate that happens inside this chamber. Maybe not always, but maybe the idea of listening to different perspectives, different views may actually come to this chamber, because the reality is the harsh numbers sometimes talk, and there is a need to actually convince more people to get on board. But I think there's another point to the concept of the minority government which I think is really useful to think about in the context of what the priorities were of this Labor government bringing to the electorate and then being elected into this position. And that is the refocus back on communities and people. And I think that minority governments can do a number of things. But one of the things that the Greens are absolutely committed to doing in sitting in our place on the crossbench is actually to ensure that we are putting the community at the heart of our democracy. And I like to see that the need for governments to negotiate and discuss and have those conversations with the crossbench is actually a way to ensure that the community voices, the diversity of community views, and if you look at the fact that on the crossbench we have the smallest electorate in the inner city, which is Newtown that I represent in terms of geographical space, and the largest electorates of Murray and Barwon also on the crossbench. We have inner city communities, we have very regional and remote communities, and we have a very broad spectrum and range of views on a number of issues. I know the member for Wagga Wagga is here, and I'd say that we probably fill that full political spectrum on a range of issues, but on the issue of where it comes to listening and to representing our communities, to taking the concerns of our communities to this chamber and making sure the government is listening to those priorities, I think that the crossbench would share many, many common values. And those values align in a lot of ways with the priorities of the incoming government, particularly when we look to the need to listen and support and help and resource our teachers and our nurses, our midwives, paramedics, those engaged in frontline services, and particularly those who are engaging with what has been a very challenging time in the land of New South Wales transport. I want to give a shout out to the incredible folks that have been dealing with the crisis under the previous behaviour of former transport ministers who I have been running the show as if it was their kingdom to be able to manoeuvre, score political points in, but really failing to get the trains running when they needed to, and then privatising all of our bus network right under our nose. They seem to have forgotten that the concept of public transport is that you keep it in public hands. It's not public transport if you actually privatise it out and people are running it to make profit, instead of actually delivering for the services of the community. And I'm pleased and happy to give credit where credit is due to the new Minister for Transport. I caught the train in from Newtown this morning. It ran very smoothly. It was the first time I'd been on a train since Parliament, and I'd like to congratulate the new Minister for Transport for doing a sensational job. I stopped catching the train when Minister Elliott was in the role because I thought he was just such a disaster. I didn't want to show him any support. I'm only joking. I like to catch public transport all the time. The other thing that I want to do, just as a shout out while I'm on the issue of transport, is talk specifically about the commitment that the Minister for Transport and the member for Summerhill made in relation to the upgrade to Lewisham Station that is on the border of the electorate of Newtown and Summerhill. That station, if members haven't seen, is regularly the subject of memes that occur where people draw fish, sharks, other things in the flooded stairwell that you have to go down to try and get into the train station. There is no accessibility at that train station. Every time it rains, it floods. And so you can't actually get down the stairs without getting wet to be able to catch the train. It's outrageous, and I say to our regional members that are new in this place, you might think that the city gets everything, but we seriously just need a lift at Lewisham Station. I'm very pleased to say that the new Minister for Transport made that commitment during the election campaign, and I look forward to very soon working with her to make sure that that promise is delivered. I'm also very pleased to see that we have a real recognition and a commitment to making sure that renters are prioritised this election. It was very much the renters' election, and one of the things that I felt was incredibly valuable about that was the fact that we now know that people are renting for longer and longer in our communities, and that the rental crisis is so significant and real. I want to acknowledge the fact that in the first priorities of this week, in the first sitting of this government, they have prioritised the need to put in rental reforms and very much welcome the portable bond scheme that is put in place. I've foreshadowed outside of this place and indicated the fact that we do have concerns about the rent bidding element, but we hope we can work constructively with the government to be able to deliver on the reforms that are needed in the rental space to make sure that we are seeing a commitment to the idea of rent bidding being ended as opposed to just secret rent bidding being ended. The other thing that I think is very important to highlight is the fact that the impact of the cost of living crisis that is having on everybody is putting financial stress on all of members of our community, and that has huge impacts both in terms of the need to ensure we are funding adequately mental health support, that we're funding adequately homelessness services, that we're funding properly crisis accommodation, that we're recognising the need and the pressures on tenants' advice and advocacy services, on domestic violence services, and we need to recognise the fact that in doing that and helping those that are the most vulnerable in our community, that is a role that the government plays to make sure that they are not left behind. It's actually critical that we recognise that tinkering around the edges when it comes to addressing these reforms is not going to be enough. We had 12 years of decimation under the Liberals and Nationals where they tendered everything that they could, they consulted everything they could, but not in a way that they listened to the community, just in a way that they could pay their wealthy consultant mates lots of money. They privatised everything they could, and they cut funding to every service that helped vulnerable people in our communities. So I would urge the Minns Labor government and all of the new incoming ministers to recognise that they need to be bold in how we are reshaping the way we are supporting vulnerable communities. Because actually just making a small shift here or a small change there is not going to be enough to actually address the kind of harm that has been done to communities over successive years and successive terms of Liberal National government in this state. What we need to see is a shift to the idea where people and communities are put first. We need to recognise the fact that that means that there should be never a person turned away from a homelessness shelter in any of our electorates. It means that there should always be someone at the end of the line when a person rings up a sexual violence or sexual assault line and they answer. It means that every time someone needs to go and get specialist care in one of our hospitals or public health facilities, that they need to be responded to and supported. We need to recognise that never should a budget surplus or a budget bottom line be the choice we take over and above the idea of making sure those people in need in our community are being looked after and cared for. I want to acknowledge that there is a significant increase in the amount of diversity and shift in the representation in this Legislative Assembly, and I say that personally it is a very welcome change to see that in this chamber. I want to acknowledge the incredible achievement of the fact that the New South Wales Labor Party, through a commitment of quotas and a commitment of developing and supporting women within their ranks, have now seen a cabinet where 50%, half of the cabinet, is made up of women. But it wouldn't be me, and it wouldn't be me, the member for Newtown, if I didn't also take a minute to say that I think we've got a long way to go. Because we might have increased the diversity here in the chamber, we might have increased the number of women in the cabinet, it's bloody great, but you might notice, Speaker, with all respect, the Speaker, the Premier, the Opposition Leader, the Government Leader of the House, the Opposition Leader Government of the House, the Government Whip, the Opposition Whip, and the Nationals Whip are all men. Women, it is time to step up. The men should not get to run this place. I would urge you all to do, I don't think anyone wants yours, Steve, I think you can have that. I think that it is really important for us to all recognise that while we face and campaign hard, especially those of us that are strong feminists and unionists in our communities, for the need for equal pay, for the need for recognition of equal pay for equal work, for the need of recognition of the importance of making sure that women have a seat at the table. That should extend to all aspects of our lives. And in this parliament as well, we need to recognise that there is currently a massive gender pay gap because of the fact that all of those positions are taken by men. We put the challenge there, that we can address that into the future. But to turn now to something that I'd like to conclude on, Speaker, if I may, and that's particularly around the need to recognise the demands and the urgent voices and cries for help in our community for desperate action on a range of measures. We saw outside of this chamber incredible actions on the street when it came to unions striking, demanding an end to the public sector wage cap, demanding ratios for our nurses and midwives, demanding the bringing of our public bus transport network and train network back into public hands, the demanding of pay and conditions for our public sector workers, and the recognition of the fact that our emergency frontline services needed help and support. We also saw First Nations people demanding and marching for justice throughout the pandemic and beyond, and it is incumbent on all of us to recognise that that ongoing struggle for First Nations justice is something that we need to all commit to delivering on in this parliament. That starts with treaty, but it must not end there. It is unacceptable for young children, First Nations children, to be tonight away from their families, away from their loved ones, locked up and incarcerated in New South Wales prisons. Prisons are no place for children. And children should not be away from their parents, from their families, from their kins, from their loved ones for one night, let alone for multiple nights, because the system has failed to provide them with the support that they need to be able to get along early in life. We also need to recognise that First Nations injustice, when it comes to the recognition of the damage and destruction happening to our environment and to our climate, is real, and that we cannot have environmental justice without First Nations justice, and we cannot have environmental justice and climate justice without racial justice. We need to recognise that there is an intersection between all of these things, and that we as this parliament have the opportunity to address it. So while I welcome the chance to be able to contribute to this address in reply debate, to comment and congratulate the incoming Men's Labor government on their election, and to welcome all new members here, I also want to say that if there was ever an opportunity for us to see that we must take radical and drastic steps to change the direction of this state, then I think the last 12 years have shown us that we were heading the wrong way. Our communities, our environment, our climate the future of many species in this state are crying out for us to act. And it is time not to just make small incremental changes, but instead to implement radical reforms that deliver on the promise that our communities have put in us to make sure that we keep them at the heart of everything that we do.